everyone. So I was kind of looking around in forums today and I saw a person post something under an anonymous title, and they asked a really good question about what to do when you offer someone a free reading in exchange for feedback while you're learning, so you can try and figure out what's working that you're doing, what's not, what resonates, all those sorts of things. I remember doing this because when I was first learning to read, I did a lot of these things. It's excellent practice. So I want to read what they wrote because I think the way they wrote it explains a lot of what we can go through and perhaps ways that we can do it better in terms of explaining to people what we want. Because I do think the reading for free for practice is not wrong. There were some people that did suggest that not happen, but I don't necessarily agree with that. So let me just tell you from my perspective what we have. So anonymous member says, how do you handle situations like these? So recently I offered a free reading in exchange for feedback from someone. And the person wanted a detailed reading for some personal question and set an unrealistic term for their wish to come true. So I made 4 different spreads. 3 were diagnostic with different decks, and there was 1 Celtic cross. And I made pictures of every spread, a detailed explanation of each, put one in a PDF file, and I invested quite a lot of effort in all this. So they're trying to do a good job. So the cards showed positive outcomes in the long run, but not within that unrealistic short term. And that person wasn't satisfied with the result of my reading and did not even bother to leave feedback for me. I'm feeling annoyed, and how do you protect yourself from things like this? So as I looked through some of the comments, I had started typing and then I looked up to see what other people were saying, just to see if someone had already said it. Some of the people suggested don't give free readings, that you shouldn't do it. There should be an energy exchange. Well, I understand that, and now that tends to be my policy. When you're practicing, those free readings can be very valuable. So I don't necessarily think that should be thrown off the table if this is something that person wants to do. Another person suggested drawing a card from the deck before you work with that person to see if you should work with them, and see what you get from the cards to see if they advise doing that or not. That was really, really clever, and that could be done for sure. But I'm going to approach it a little bit different way. So just to give you a little bit of history, many years ago when I was learning to do readings, first thing I learned to do was read stones before I learned to read tarot cards. I was taught to do it by a gifted psychic in our area. She's very good. She spent several hours with me, and I'll always be grateful for that time with her. And what I wanted to do was see if there was really anything to this. Could I say something to someone that made no sense to me and have it be meaningful to the person sitting there, or would they be like, oh no, that makes no sense to me? So I put a challenge to myself, and I actually brought my little bag of stones to work. I had memorized what each of the stones represented. It's very similar to like Lenormand, where there's one that represents family and home, one that represents business, one that represents sexuality, one that represents money, career. There was something for everything, and how they jumbled together. It wasn't like an organized placing. You kind of let them fall, and how they cluster creates these little stories. It's very interesting, and it was very powerful learning experience for me. So I brought my little bag of stones to work and put out an offer. First, I went to my closest friends and said, I really want to know if there's anything to this, so I'm challenging myself to 50 readings just to make sure that I'm not like bluffed into thinking that there's something to this when really there's nothing to it. So I wanted to, it was partly a challenge for myself, a challenge to see if this was worth my time, but also I wanted to experience it. So what I did is I did these readings in exchange for feedback, much like this poster, the anonymous poster, is doing. I just wanted to get feedback. So what we did is we spent probably 15 or 20 minutes maybe sometimes a half an hour with each person, and I would give them a reading, and then they would give me feedback. I asked about what made sense, what didn't. Looking back on it, I would probably ask the questions differently or have a different repertoire of questions when I went, so I could make sure I was being more specific with what I meant about feedback. And I did 50 readings. I actually had a lined sheet of paper numbered 1 to 50, and I had different people come in at different times. Word got out, people got curious, people wanted to know what it was like. Part of this had to do with me getting comfortable with doing this too, because in the workplace, that's not necessarily filled with people who care about people who are different, or they may have some biases against that. So it was opening myself to feeling comfortable enough with this that I could do this and not feel kind of like judged for doing it. But I found that most people are actually very excited about being in that space when we shut the door, and I could just tell them what I see, and they were curious. I don't know that they actually came in believing that I could do this, but they were curious about it. And when they left, the feedback was extremely interesting. So that was extremely important to my journey, and I found that I could say some things, and especially the things that I felt a little uncomfortable saying because I wasn't sure if this was right or wrong about the person, but that was usually the tidbit that made the most sense or hit the biggest nerve, or like made that person really step back and say, how did you know that? That sort of thing. But it's the unexpected thing. So I do think that feedback is really important. These were all free readings. Then I spent some time on the free reading network online. There's a website, the free tarot network and the free reading network. So I participated in both. First, I joined, you have to do so many weeks under a mentor, and there's certain rules you have to follow, and a certain way you have to do your signature, so not to solicit readings except in a very specific way. And so I did that just to gain experience doing it. And these were email readings, so you didn't want to go on and on and on. It was maybe like a page and a half at most. And a lot of times it would be one card or two cards. We weren't doing Celtic crosses, but people would ask 1 or 2 questions, and you would just do your thing. A mentor guided you in those first weeks and read through it, and they went, I don't remember, I think there were rules about like not predicting or something like that. I can't remember, it's been so many years since I did that. But they basically, you would have a mentor that could guide you, or perhaps you want to change the way you say it to say this way, or do you want to perhaps shift this little paragraph here to reflect something else, or have you noticed that the card also had this? And so I learned a lot. And once you're done with your mentor, you have the option of just continuing like you are. If you want, you can be a mentor. So for a while I did this, and then on my own, and then I became a mentor for other readers, so you can guide and help other people. So that was a big part of my growth too. When you get feedback, knowing what I know now, and now that I've done this for so much longer, there's a couple things that I think I would change. So if I were to ask feedback from someone, it's really important to describe or define what you mean by the word feedback. Like, what is feedback? Oh, that was good, but you're not really learning anything about what you did by just saying, did this make sense? So I would probably today write down questions that would say something like, and I wrote down a few, just like, what would I ask now? And I would ask, what parts of this resonated the most with you? What parts did not sound like I was making sense or didn't seem to apply? And I would ask, how can I improve my delivery or what I say? Just little questions like that that are open, that suggest how the person receives it, rather than just saying, I want feedback. And if you ask for feedback, they may say, oh yeah, that was good, thanks, and they think they're giving you feedback. Or like this particular one, the person was upset because they didn't seem to get what they wanted. And is that the reading was bad, or was it that the outcome wasn't what they wanted? So my suspicion and what my feeling was is the person didn't get the outcome that they wanted from the reading. So I want to talk about this point too, because a lot of times when you do readings and you're saying something to someone that feels uncomfortable because it's not what they wanted, that leads to anxiety because they're concerned that there's like a wall they're going to hit. There's something they're not going to get. It's something's not coming to fruition. This question is important to them. And sometimes they'll repeat it back to us like, what do you mean? Da, 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 da. And it can look like sort of like an attack or like the disbelief is often that person just challenging it in their head to themselves. Like, what if this happens? What do I do? And they're panicking. You're seeing the anxiety come out. So if you're giving a reading and it doesn't give some sort of outcome or delivery like this person in the time frame that they want, they are left at the end dangling. There's a dangling anxiety. And I don't like leaving readings myself when I get a reading that way because I feel it feels hopeless, and oftentimes we're just not asking the right questions. So when I'm with a client, I'll often say things like, well, it's not happening within this 3 months. Do you want to take a look beyond that and see what they say? Well, let's take a look and we can figure out what the next time frame is we want to look at. Is it 6 months? Is it the end of the year? Is whatever. And take a look there. If then you see it starting to grow, great. If you don't want to leave them thinking like it's all is lost. You may want to start thinking to make sure you're asking the right questions. For example, is this a relationship that is in my highest good? Or am I seeing this relationship for what it is? Or this thing that I want to do, is there another way I can approach it that can give me the desired outcome I want, and maybe in a quicker time? The questions you ask are extremely important. So typically when we're asking, will this happen? What it's telling us is if you continue the patterns the way you're doing now, this is likely to be the outcome. But patterns can be broken, and it's not easy. It can be difficult. It can be very challenging to break our own personal patterns. But when we know that we should be doing something differently, it can help guide us. So I would give that advice to the person doing the readings, just so that the person on the receiving end feels like they're getting something that they can work with, like a nugget that they can take and I can work with that. Like now I know what to do. I have better clarity on like what to do with this. It's not going to happen, but if this happens, there's this option. I had never considered that. Or maybe it's time to consider that thing that I put on the shelf all this time and hadn't really thought about. So make sure to give them options. So clarify what feedback means and ask more specific questions to make sure that your definition of feedback matches theirs. It may be the first reading they've ever had and they don't even know what to do with that feedback piece. Even today, when I do readings, I'll always put at the end, if any part of this doesn't make any sense, or if it's unclear, could you let me know? Because I want to make sure that your reading is super clear to you and you understand. And sometimes like this person gave a very long reading, and I like how they summarize it at the end. They said, the gist was they're not going to do it within 3 months, but it'll take a little longer and then it's likely to happen. That kind of summary you have to actually write in there and say that. You can start with that right out of the gate and say, the short answer is, boom, here are more of the details of why. And then you can go on with that. And you can, if you're working back and forth with a person, you can say, would you like me to look into such and such, like 6 months, and see where that goes? And since you're doing this for free, you're not going to be worried about an extra fee. Or you can just say at the bottom, since this is not what we were hoping to hear, I'm curious, let's take a look at what would happen in the next months, and then just expand on that. And again, if it doesn't look the same, say we may not be asking the right question, let's take a look if there's some other way we could be looking at this to make it happen. So those are the things that came to my mind. I do think doing free readings for practice is excellent. I got a lot of readings under my belt doing this. In the beginning, it was hundreds and hundreds of free readings working there at the Free Reading Network. It might have even been more because you can choose how many at that time you did a day, like 20, or you could do, I think it was a week, 20 a week, 24 a week. And then at the end, I was only doing the minimum, which is like 2 questions a week or something, just to kind of dabble in. I felt like I was giving back to the community by offering that and by helping, by mentoring. But I think to clarify what you mean by feedback is helpful. Make sure you ask what resonated or what surprised them in a good way, and then also what was unexpected. Ask if she's unhappy. Say, what about it made you uncomfortable? What didn't you like? And if she said she didn't like the outcome, well, that doesn't necessarily mean the reading is bad, because you don't, if it's in the future, you don't know until it actually happens. And I remember back then, and I even encourage people to do this now, but I remember saying to people, we won't know this until that time period passes. Feel free to reach out to me when that happens, because it helps me to know how things turn out. And knowing how your predictions and what you see in the cards as a likely outcome happens, you'll get more information as they tell you the stories with the details, so you'll understand the cards better by looking back on them. And you'll also gain more faith in yourself as a reader as you see how your voice applies to that outcome. Until you actually know what her outcome is, we wouldn't know if it would happen that way or not. But people can be bothered when it's not the answer they want, but it could still be a perfect reading. I've told people in the past, and even recent past, a certain house wouldn't be able to sell in the timeline they wanted. I had a person, I remember when I was first starting to read, she actually got up out of her chair and stormed out. She was so upset that the house wouldn't sell within this period of time. And the person that was hosting came over and said, what happened with that? And I explained, what had happened, but I didn't even get to say the next part. So sometimes there can be things that happen even before you have a moment, or you have to be careful with how you present it. If you think it's going to be sensitive to them to receive it, to say, it may not be the answer that they want, but soften the blow. Without being dishonest, you have to say what you see, but you also can say, let's explore this a little bit more together and see if there's something we can do. So that's really all I wanted to say. I mean, I do think that the advice that people gave about not doing free readings, when you're a professional, that's fine. But, when you're practicing, I think the more practice you do anything, the better. And when you're going in blind to a reading and you don't know the other person's situation, that's a whole different level than reading yourself or reading a family member, that or even a celebrity that you kind of know some of the circumstances. This is someone you may never have seen. So knowing how things resonated really matters. So I hope this is helpful to people. I hope it gets you better feedback, to make sure that it's clearer between the two of you what's expected for feedback and how you can use that. Because my gut feeling is that if anything was not easy for that person in giving this particular person feedback, is that it may have been so many cards and so much to absorb. It might have been difficult to break down, like, this part made sense, I don't know what this was, and that sort of thing. It just may have been too much information. So it's easier to give feedback on shorter things. So maybe start with the smaller readings and just take it in portions. And if you want to do more on it, then break it into different readings for them and say, would you mind if I did this part? I did find learning that working in forums where you can get practice on other people. I practice in Lenormand forums. We've read on world events. We've read on each other. We've done all different things. Getting the feedback from people on what happens later that day after getting the cards was extremely valuable as you're trying to speed your growth to do better in a shorter period of time, because you're doing so many things. So I think there's a lot of value to doing free readings, trying things, practicing things, doing things on yourself, doing daily card draws, and to judge your own readings, read your own future outcomes or patterns, write it in a journal, because that solidifies what the actual question was. Sometimes what we think we asked is actually a little different than what we asked when we look back. The actual precise question, what your answer was, put the date down that you did it, the date you expect it, put in your phone to, on the date that it's supposed to happen, a reminder to go back and look at that, so you can go back and compare by that date, did this come true, and put the journal entry. You can number it, you can date it, whatever, to see if how it was, so you can kind of get your own feedback from yourself in that way. And you can ask yourself the same questions. What in this resonated with me? What didn't make any sense? Where did I perhaps get it a little bit wrong, or the wording was just a little too far reaching, and then I know to reel that in the next time? Could I have said more than I did, and I was afraid and I made it too short? All those sort of things. And we continue as readers to do this and expand and grow to make ourselves better. So I wish you much luck, Anonymous, whoever you are, in your journey. I think you're doing wonderful things trying to get feedback. And I hope you continue and aren't discouraged. I think that likely the reading was a good one. Who's to know, unless you get the feedback from someone. But perhaps make it clear before you do the reading. Say, when I want feedback, what I'm kind of looking for is, just to hear from you, like what resonated, what didn't, however you define what you want it to be. And if they agree to that, those are the questions you can actually put in. If it's an email reading, type them at the bottom. Thank you for doing this. Now I'm super interested in your feedback, and ask the specific questions. If they're sitting with you, you can have them write them out, or just ask in person. And another thing I find is helpful, and this is kind of a little bit off topic, but not, is sometimes people take away from a reading something very different than what you think you said. And it's hard for our brains to process things sometimes, just like I said, when they're like, what do you mean? So they may be interpreting it different, and when you think you told them something was not necessarily going to work, and you ask them, so how would you rephrase back to me what I said about whether or not this would work? Make sure what they received from you is actually what you said. You would be surprised. All right. Take care. Wish you much well in your learning journey, and I hope this was helpful. And I would love to get a reading from you someday and give you feedback, whoever you are. Take care.